What a setup. Cool. Ah, okay. They don't see us. All right. Do the people on Zoom right now, do you hear me?
Hear you.
Okay, awesome. That's wonderful. All right. Well, it is great to be here. My name's Hannah. I'm a professor in the Cinema Studies Department and the Art Department. I actually have a background as a historian of science, and so the opportunity to kind of moderate and just absorb all the different kinds of questions on this program is really wonderful for me. So I look forward to hearing your questions. I just wanted to throw out one question to Mariana to start. I couldn't help but think during your film, I need to ask her what her relationship is to the darkness. You know, like as a filmmaker, your relationship to the darkness.
Yeah, well, obviously I could have gone many directions with this subject matter, right? There's so many different conservation efforts around so many different species. And for me, selecting efforts that took either place at night or in the pre-dawn hours or dusk, kind of on the edges of darkness, was a way of allowing people to maybe think differently about these everyday spaces, parks, public beaches, in the way that darkness transforms the landscape. And also in choosing efforts around darkness, I kind of wanted to subtly tap into maybe a sci-fi aesthetic, and in the way that many science fiction films are asking or that are about the quest for extraterrestrial life, what it means to look for life on Earth and kind of assess the damage that we've done.
Yeah, I thought like visually you did a really remarkably interesting job of just like actually just recording the darkness and being in the darkness and like making the light come out of it. It's beautiful. Who's next?
Oh, I just wanted to also say I kept thinking about Melissa's piece with the phantasmagory and like the cryptid search, and it was so nice to see those two things together. It was sort of, yeah, they just felt like they were talking to each other a lot.
And we can all introduce ourselves. Would you all like to? Should we have everyone introduce themselves?
I'm Emma. I did the ecofeminist disaster film. Who was sleeping on my lap during this program?
And I'm Mariana, and I had the feature Just Above the Surface of the Earth for Coming Extinction.
And how about our Zoom filmmakers?
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Alex. I have the one with the olive sparrow.
Yeah, Christina, can you unmute?
Oh, I am unmuted.
Okay. All right. Well, let me throw out.
Can you hear me now? Oh, but I can't hear you guys.
Yeah,
we can hear you.
Okay. So who has a yes, Laura Conway.
Hello. Yeah, so this is a question for Emma. I think you made this project in conjunction with some writing.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could tell us about what you wrote about.
So it's all kind of moving together. Like this is a series. There's like 17 films from the 70s that are all dealing with human related climate change in like very explicit ways that we don't see in film now at all. And so it's sort of like part film, part diary. Oh, Kristen. Christina. Anyway, sorry. Yeah. So all those things go together. So the writing is kind of analyzing the films, but then also thinking about this practice of corrective montage where you're going back in the past and kind of rewriting history to make new possibilities for the future. So that's what the writing is.
Can you talk about the feminist of your title?
Well, yeah, it's kind of a joke, right? Because most of these films are like incredibly sexist. And I started out looking at sort of themes of fertility in these films and how like pregnancy and childbearing and that was related to the environment in these films. And so I had created these AI posters to go along with the films, and they kind of came up with the title based on like some of the text and the prompts that I was going with. So it was kind of like this joke of footage and parallels with AI.
Yes. Yeah, we need a mic for Mata over here.
My question is for Mariana. Watching your film, I was thinking that a lot of the film, I don't know, seems like a Bellatar film. There's just, biologists like kind of pointlessly just walking in extremely long takes. And even like that long take with the three biologists just like counting the sounds from the frogs was kind of like, I don't know, it seemed like an adaptation of like Waiting for Godot. And it, in many ways, even like it seems to me that like it's not like for a future or coming extinction, but like humans are like living the apocalypse in the film. And that comes through like how all of these like scientists, biologists are like completely decentered, kind of like helpless. It's everything that they're trying to do is a little bit absurd. And I was wondering, this was like how I perceived it, that towards the end, especially like through the voiceovers and everything, kind of like the human figure takes takes the center back again. And I was wondering, what the intention behind that was.
Yeah, so the project very much, I was living in Chicago at the time, and the Midwest has a very vast network of citizen science efforts, particularly around frogs, around bats. And I came to wonder, what does it mean to look at these sometimes strange and often absurd images that emerge from modern wildlife conservation efforts and what they say about us? And yes, they're often seemingly futile, right? And then as I began going out with some of the groups, as I began developing the project, the frog monitors were one of the first groups I went out with. I was really moved by their dynamic amongst themselves and the experience of being out in this, kind of scrappy suburban, nothing grassland area, right? And what it means to, spend 5 minutes attending to the maybe 5 frogs that are there, and how this could possibly be a source of stretching our sense of empathy and care for the environment, maybe be a source of agency and hope over the future. And then, the haiku that are woven throughout. One of the frog monitors wrote those about the grassland. And I was also very moved by how earnest she was in these writings and how much she actually does deeply care about this space. And so then in the structure of the piece, my thoughts about it very much change in that I want to move from these more observational shots to these more effective lyrical moments where the audience might get caught up in kind of the emotive experiential elements of the landscapes and shifting between those two. And as well in the observational, where at times we might be observing the observers, but maybe at times you also become the observer yourself, like counting the frogs or counting the bats as they emerge, and how shifting between those two modes of the observational and the lyrical and effective could maybe lead to a new way of thinking and perceiving these landscapes and our relationships to them.
Thank you.
I have a question for Lords, I believe. Yeah. Your film was so stark and focused, and I got into it in a way that of the unusual presentation. You wore me out with the information, and that was okay. And then I started thinking, well, why are my eyes moving around? They're sort of moving because of the sound is moving. If it were silent and I were looking at the olive finch, I can't remember what it's called. It was interesting to me that you dared to be so minimal with information on the soundtrack and just as one picture that you zoomed in and out of. And I wondered what the background is and your thoughts on it.
Oh, thank you. I think that goes to some of the things that were just said in relation to attunement, right? In terms of reading an image as a kind of an attunement to this other being. Of course, it's a dead specimen that we're looking at, and sort of how that came about is really I was invited to sort of a larger project. Where there's various artists who do portraits of birds that are on the Audubon extinction list. And I was asked to do a portrait of an olive sparrow, a bird that I have never encountered and never had any effective relationship to. And I found that to be, I guess, unreasonable in the hierarchy of things for me to make a portrait of somebody that I did not know. So that is why the film is the way that it is. And the film sort of becomes this absurd history lesson that is just being yappered at you about these men who like to go around and name things.
I had a kind of a follow-up question, I guess, because one of the things that I was so struck by about your film was that there was this, I thought incredible and like fascinatingly like detailed story that we're getting. But it seemed to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but that there actually was like information on the specific specimen, that it was like from Michigan and it had been killed in, but that there was, I mean, what struck me as like so, at least stark, was that like nothing that you said seemed to line up with the information that was on the tags. Like you weren't addressing even this specific, I mean, I think it kind of goes with your point a little bit about the absurdity, because you have this very specific specimen you're showing us. It's from Michigan. It's not part of your story. And it is, and you're talking about a holotype. You're talking about this whole idea of like creating this language, creating a typology that's always like oriented around an individual specimen. And the specimen you're showing us has like no relationship at all to the story, which I found like, at first I was like, oh, this must be a mistake. And then I was like, no, that's it. So. Right.
It's, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm just coming in here. It's like, right. It's that thing that bird doesn't, that individual specimen does not have an agency in how it was named. Right. The holotype is at the the American Museum of Natural History, and I'm actually going to see that holotype on Wednesday to see the first bird that laid the name to this. But you guys froze for me. I'm sorry.
We can still hear you.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. This is a question for Mariana. I was just taken by your mention of the idea of empathy, and I was actually very taken by the relationship of the camera to the subject and this interesting kind of respectful distance, always at a distance, yet when you said empathy, I found myself as the women were counting frogs, I was counting too. And I was like, no, you missed one. There was you're not counting because I have a relation. I mean, I've spent time with a lot of frogs when I was a kid, and I know what they sound like and I know where they go. And it's like, no, you're missing a frog. So my question really has to do with in the creation of empathy is like, where does the film go? Who's the ultimate audience in your mind? I don't think it's film festival audience, is it? Or does it, like, where do you want that empathy to come from? Is it other filmmakers, or is it the public? Is it the funders? Is it the state of Oregon, the state of Wisconsin?
Well, I think it's anyone who watches the film, which is going to be film festival audiences, but also after its festival run, I plan to do a tour at organizations that were involved, scientists, citizen scientists in local communities. So I think it can have different lives, right? And different audiences will respond to different elements of the film. Like film festival audiences may be more patient with some of the, structural filmmaking techniques, and citizen scientists or environmental organizations may respond to other elements of the film. So I'm interested, it's just at the beginning of its run, so I'm interested in how different audiences respond.
I wanted to make a comment, which is that I saw a film recently that this filmmaker made with a group of people in Indonesia, and he actually, I saw it too, and he like made 2 cuts of the film, which I thought was just so rare that somebody would do that, because he thought like the group of people he made it with wouldn't like his like more art house cut, so he made another cut that he thought they would actually enjoy. I've never heard of anyone doing that before. I thought it was great. So this is a question about conservation, because it seems like many of these films deal with conservation, and I feel like part of the image of conservation is that it's like neutral, and like based on reason. I think actually conservation is quite political and a bit random in the way that it's organized, like often based on interest groups. And maybe it's not random because those are often like super wealthy interest groups. So if a wetland is like in Santa Barbara, it's more likely to be like a focal point for conservation than if it's, near say a less wealthy part of the country or world. And so I'm wondering like how you all think about conservation and like how it should be considered. Like, do we conserve frogs everywhere equally? Do we try to save them? Like thinking that we're in a place of like triage at this point with the way, the Anthropocene is going. Like, yeah, do we triage? Do we say some parts of the world or the country, like, okay, well, if we can't save the frogs there, let's save them in this one area, like in a national park? Do we try to save them all equally? Do we, like, what is like a way to think about that? And I know you guys are filmmakers, but I feel like you all have studied this a bit, and I'm just curious what you might think about that.
I mean, can I? I have one thought, and that is just thinking about this whole relationship as like the human being the saviors, and I think that's part of what these re-editings for me have been like in this series of films, because they're all so focused on, like, yes, they talk about climate change, but it's all like from this human perspective, and it's all about the salvation of the humans. And there's even something about humans deciding, okay, which species are we going to save, or which area are we going to save? And I think that there's this necessary rethinking of just those hierarchies in general, and maybe as humans we should be thinking about how to get into a position not of needing to conserve. I don't know, it's just one thought.
I guess the way I could answer it is that in choosing what efforts I was going to follow, what groups I was going to follow, I knew that in addition to thinking about the night, I didn't want to focus on efforts that were widely like making headlines in news, like polar bears or whooping cranes, but kind of attending to these amphibians, insects, things, the charisma challenge species, as they call them, right? And also these unglamorous spaces like a suburban grassland preserve. It's not very romantic, right? It's not the great wilderness of Alaska or something like this. And so I think for me, it was about how people relate to their local spaces, whatever they are, if that's a alleyway or what have you, and whatever space you have access to, and that more important than the data that they're collecting and its contributions to science or conservation efforts or getting funding for further conservation efforts. It was about exercising this kind of like muscle of empathy and care and how that can lead to greater things. So that doesn't exactly answer your question, but that's how I was thinking about it.
Yeah, if I could just jump in. I mean, it seems like your film, it kind of presents a very like distributed idea of conservation, like just the way it moves between different people and different sites. It's not just like one suburban area. I mean, it does have a kind of vision of, I think, conservation is something that comes up collectively. That if there were enough of these people going out in the night, that's the only chance, right?
Yeah.
So that's sort of the feeling I got, which is, the opposite of this kind of, this like Superman narrative that isn't, I know it's not your narrative, but the narrative that you're drawing out, drawing up to critique as being, but they have an interesting relationship with each other.
I think that's why in the voiceover, I didn't want to have like one master narrator, but rather have this kind of choir of voices that was all contributing to their performed text.
Lords, do you have any thoughts on how to solve the conservation crisis?
I just figured it out now, but I forgot to write it down on my notebook here. I think that for me, and I resonate with what has been said so far, but I think it sort of comes back to what does solidarity look like? And what does solidarity look like in a global context, where the global context is so overwhelming and so endless, that I'm thinking about how do we, which has already sort of been addressed, how do we build these smaller units of solidarity in knowing around us. That it's not really necessarily solution based, it's more feeling based, right? What I'm saying right now, and that's probably good. We maybe need less sort of, I don't know, these sort of solution based approaches before we have felt things. Yeah, those are my initial thoughts about that. Solidarity, what does it look like? And
It doesn't look like dead birds. No, I mean it does look like, I mean, so I think no, I was like that you're no, I think like, so I'm just like thinking about that in relation to your film, and like one of the things that I think is so valuable about the story that you're telling, you're telling a story about these people, and their idea of conservation is that you have to kill these birds, right? That the way you conserve nature and like create the knowledge of it is to go out and like find birds and kill them and bring them back and preserve them and stuff. And so I think that presents like to us now, we all can kind of, like snicker at it and be like, oh, that was so stupid that people who cared about nature in the 19th century and, until 1960 thought that the best way to, care about it was to go kill animals and stuff them. And, but the fact that it wasn't crazy, right? Like it wasn't crazy to them, I think, allows us to be a little bit more cautious, I think, about any one particular solution that we think, makes sense.
Right, and also all those, many at least, we can't say all, but many of those specimens that have been taken in the past, we can use for research today, because we can do DNA, we can do all sorts of stuff on these specimens that were taken in the past. So it's this ability to hold that ambiguity with the past as we move forward in a way. Sorry, you're still frozen to me, so I don't know what's going on.
Okay, well, can you hear us? No, okay, you're great though.
I can hear you, but you've been sitting in the same position for the last 10 minutes.
Okay. Okay, one more question?
Yes.
Great.
A few of us last night had a conversation about documentaries and humor, and my question is, I found humor in all of your pieces, in sweet ways, and sometimes more overtly, and sometimes it felt more covert. So my question is this: one, am I sick? Like, did I miss? Do you consider your pieces individually to be humorous, or do you see humor in your own pieces? And then second, what do you see as the role of humor in works like what you're trying to make?
I think we should always have fun, whatever we're doing. And so, yeah, I think that just has to come out in some way or another. And I also think that these issues are so serious and depressing, and they weigh heavy on my heart, but like, we're all still here right now. And so there has to be some way of coping with it. And I think like even like Charlie Chaplin, right? Like it was that was his whole thing of like dealing with these really serious social issues, but through funny ways. And I think sometimes it's easier to access, or it's nice to remember that things can be horrible and wonderful. Or not wonderful, but funny. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, it was, these are just the characters. These are who they are. These are the people themselves, and spending time with them. I was, their way of telling stories about their experiences, and that guy in particular, right? He's such a character, and I didn't want to like take that out and make him, just mine his interviews for only, doomsday type content, but to keep that there, and yeah, to keep that joy in the characters as well.
Thank you. Well, thanks everybody. Thank you to the filmmakers for being here and for showing such amazing work. And thank you for these great questions. And let's go save the world.